welcome to the Make a Living podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So the listeners have heard me talk about that I've started working with a coach, and this is my coach, Dan. And I've really enjoyed it. And I'm really excited to have him on the podcast because it, I think, will help a lot of people that are either interested in getting a coach or becoming a coach. And also just hearing some potentially comforting statements that you're not alone and others are also trying to figure all this out. So I do want to focus on your career path as a coach. But since the majority of our listeners are in their 20s and early 30s and in kind of the figuring it out phase with their career, I thought it would be really helpful to hear about your path prior to coaching, which is started as a chef, and then you also became a founder of an English muffin brand. Before we start, how old are you, Dan?
42.
42. Great.
Yeah.
Take us back to your saying, hey, I need a job. What does that look like and where do you start?
Yeah. I guess it would make most sense to start with the food part of my journey, because anything before that was just kind of like a hodgepodge of random jobs everywhere. Just, didn't really know what I was going to do after I went to a little bit of schooling for audio engineering, realized very quickly that wasn't something I was interested in doing. I was like 22 at that point where I was like, okay, well, what path do I actually want to take here? And I came up with three potential paths. I thought ambulance, paramedic, radio DJ, or a chef. The radio DJ was interesting to me at first because I was like, my parents came from radio. Like I grew up in that world and I was like, oh, cool. Like I'll check that out. And I went to a school that is all about that. And honestly, it was like the saddest environment ever. And I was like, this was in like this was like 2005, 2006. And you could just tell like traditional radio was kind of going away because, Sirius XM was coming online and like all that stuff. And I'm just like, no, this isn't for me. Like, the people, the people who were kind of like teaching the class, you could just tell like they were not hopeful. I'll just put it that way. So I just got this kind of feeling like, no, I think I'm good with this. And then I was like, well, maybe paramedic. And then I started realizing, oh, I really don't like the look of like broken bones and that kind of stuff. So I think that's a pretty like that right there. I was like, that's an easy no.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, cooking. Like cooking sounds fun. Like that's something I can sink my teeth into. And so I was probably 23 when I started cooking, and I just got into restaurants that I thought I would like to learn what this chef was doing. Didn't want to go to culinary school. I figured I'd save, 40 grand there.
Yeah.
And that kind of put me on a path for the next, I say 7, 8 years of just hopping around to different restaurants, different parts of the country, just, leveling up in my skill. Then somewhere in there, I tried to start a tech company and moved out to Palo Alto where everybody was moving to start a tech company. Realized pretty quickly that I was not up for that either. And I got back into cooking. That was like a year and a half detour. So yeah, 29, I became kind of disillusioned with the idea of being a chef because, I was thinking, I remember one of my chefs telling me, and he was at the top of his game. He said, he came to me and he was like, this is a pipe dream. He was like, honestly, like I work 80 to 100 hours a week. I never see my family. And I did the math and I may make like $6 an hour. And I'm like,
Wow.
okay. All right. Well, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. So
Where do you start in a role like that? Like, do you have to have restaurant experience? Obviously, it's very different working in a restaurant serving versus cooking, but like, what's like the first job?
traditionally, first job is dishwasher, which is what I
Okay.
did. Yeah. So you just get in there, it's grunt work. It's just you're washing dishes. And then someone's like, a chef is like, hey, can you cut a bunch of carrots? And then you're like, oh, okay. And now you're into prep. And then so you do prep a little bit. And then they bring you on, like, hey, we're going to show you how to make a salad. And now you're on the line making cold apps. And then it like kind of progresses from there all the way to, sous chef and chef de cuisine if it's kind of like a traditional French brigade system in the kitchen. And then you become a chef and that kind of thing. I think around 29, I started to become disillusioned with the idea of being a chef and owning a restaurant just because it was so much work. And, the chances of success were really, really slim. And so I stepped out of that and I became a private chef to a family in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And that was cool because I still enjoyed cooking, but it wasn't in the grind of a restaurant. And I was doing good, but I still was kind of aimless.
I didn't realize how long you were a chef.
Yeah.
So
Oh
this
yeah.
is
Yeah. It
interesting
was
to
it
me.
was it was a huge. Yeah. I mean, it was basically my entire 20s.
But good
Um,
for the listeners to know. You're so in your 20s, you're like, is chef the thing? Is tech the thing? You're coming back to the East Coast. Okay.
Oh yeah, and the whole time I was thinking, I've got to figure this out now, or else, like, I'm gonna be stuck at some dead end thing for the rest of my life. Like, I was
Yes.
really
This is like
dramatic.
everyone's fear. Everyone's like, I'm gonna get stuck. Everyone's so afraid
Yeah,
of getting stuck.
yeah, yeah. And what I've come to see, and I'll get back to my story, but what I've come to see since is like people pivot in their 60s and have fulfilling, meaningful work, right? Or start fulfilling, meaningful, thriving businesses. You know, it's such a trite thing to say these days, but like age really is a number. It really is. So anyway, so 29, I'm like, okay, like, am I gonna just keep going into this private chef thing? Because I can be successful there, but do I really want that? And I really liked working for myself. Like I discovered that. I'm like, I really enjoy being my own boss. Like I'm a self starter, and that's
Hmm.
something that I recognize too, which is important to be your own
Yeah.
boss. You have to be a self starter. And so at the time I was living with a friend from high school who was a bread salesman in Boston, and he was selling bread to all these restaurants around Boston, kind of high end restaurants. And at the time, it was kind of cool to put burgers on English muffins in like the
Mm.
hip restaurants in Boston.
I
But they
kind of
were
remember
using,
this.
yeah, it was like 2013, 2012, something like that.
Yes.
And, but they were using, some kind of generic knockoff of Thomas's, just some, cheap English muffin. So they were all going to my friend who was selling them bread and saying, "Hey, can your bakery make a really good English muffin? Because we're charging people like $25 for this burger, and it's on this like, on this piece of bread that you could get at Stop and Shop for like buy one get two free kind of thing." So he went back to his baker, and his baker didn't want to do it. And he came to me and he said, "Hey, you've got time in your schedule because you're only working 3 days a week for this family. There seems to be a gap in the market in the bread world, at least in the Boston restaurant scene. And people are looking
Mm.
for a good English muffin. Maybe we should make one." And I
Cool.
thought, okay, well, how hard could that be? And it was actually really hard because I'd never baked before. So
I was
I
gonna ask. I actually don't even know how you make an English muffin.
Well, not to get too weeded in the description, but traditionally it's like a batter that gets poured into like a little mold that goes through an oven, and that's why you get all these pockets of nooks and crannies, and that whole thing is that it's a loose batter, and the again, not to get too scientific about it, but the yeast kind of burps and sweats and creates bubbles, and that's where you get
Yeah.
bubbles in bread is the
Got it.
is the carbon dioxide. So anyway, so I started making English muffins in my apartment. We were living together outside of Boston, and uh, after about 2 months of testing, I came up with something that I thought was commercially viable, but also stood apart from a traditional English muffin. So we just started the business in our apartment, and it was completely illegal. We didn't have any certifications. We had no licenses, nothing. We didn't know about cottage licenses, where you can basically run a food business out of your own kitchen, but it has to be, approved by the Board of Health and that kind of thing.
Mhm. Does that still exist, by the way? Like, people can still do that if they wanted to, get that cottage
Totally. Yeah,
license?
yeah. It's called a cottage license. And if you make a food product, as long as it doesn't require, deep freezing or keeping hot, or, raw meats or whatever, I'm sure every state is different. You can get a cottage industry license and basically start a food business from your home. So we started doing that, and we were living in an apartment building where our landlord lived right across the hall from us, and he didn't know that we were doing this. So
Mm.
we started selling to local restaurants in the Boston scene, running this illegal operation out of our apartment, and it started to take off. It like really started to get some traction because chefs were talking to each other about it. And we set up this online thing. It was before Shopify, called Big Cartel, where you could just sell your goods online. And we were getting hits every once in a while from places around Boston. But one day we got like, I don't know, probably anywhere from 20 to 30 orders from all over the country. And
Mm.
we're like, what's that about? So I reach out to
Yeah.
somebody who's like somewhere down south. I'm like, "Hey, thanks for your order, but how did you hear about us?" And they're like, oh, Zagat named you guys the #3 bakery to watch out for in 2014 in the
Oh,
US. And we're like, what? Because like I'm looking around, there's like flour and cornmeal everywhere. Like it's an illegal operation, but we get this write up in Zagat. And it turns out that Zagat went to one of our accounts in Boston called Russell House Tavern. They're still there. And
yeah.
they noticed the burger and they're like, what is that? And so the chef told them about us. And then they just decided to write a little blurb about us. And
Wow.
so that was kind of a stroke of luck.
Yeah.
But at that time, our landlord one day walked in and just saw this illegal baking operation going on. And he was like, what the heck is going on here? And we're like, oh, we were so naive. We didn't know it was not something that you could do. So we told him we started a business, and he actually evicted us because we couldn't operate a business. So we were like homeless bakers for like the next like 2 or 3 months. We literally didn't have a place to sleep. And so we were hopping around, to different friends' restaurants and going in when the restaurants would close, cook overnight, and leave and clean up before the pastry chefs came in the next morning. So we were like Santa's
Wow.
elves. We were cooking like overnight, and we didn't have a car.
And
So yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna ask at this point, like, are you making any profit off of your illegal business?
No, not at all.
Okay.
We didn't know anything about, setting the price and, all of that stuff. COGS, we had no idea about that. But we had one investor who was a friend's father from high school who was kind of feeding us like $500 a week just to keep the lights on and eat, basically.
Mhm.
And we had found another apartment by that time. And so we were, in the morning, we were calling up Ubers and being like, hey, you need to come pick us up. And Uber would show up. And instead of us getting in the back seat, we would throw our muffins in the back seat and just say, just drop them off at, Lincoln Tavern in South Boston. And it's okay. You'll still get paid. So Uber was actually our first distributor.
Oh,
Yeah. So
and this
it
is
was
also before now there actually is Uber Courier where it can actually take goods, but at this point, like they probably were like, "You're not getting in the car."
Yeah, no, you're right. We every single time we're like, we're not getting in. It's just our muffins. If you just pull up in front of the restaurant, somebody knows you're coming. They're gonna run out. They'll grab the muffins. You're good. You're like you're fine. And so Uber really became our first distributor. Around that time, we finally found a spot, a local spot that was really small, and we could do our own baking there. And one day we just decided to go to a local food festival in Boston and set up a table. And it went really well. And some guy eventually came up to us and said, hey, are you guys in Whole Foods yet? And we had not even considered anything like that. We just thought we were going to sell to restaurants in Boston.
Right.
And we said, no, we haven't even thought of that. And he handed us his card and he said, well, when you're ready, call me. And he ended up being the local bakery distributor or forager for our region of Whole Foods.
Mm.
And so like 2 weeks later, we called him and we said, we're ready. And we definitely weren't. And we got into Whole Foods. And it was just, to spare, a 6-hour, R-rated tale. It really was like, it just took off. It was one of these things where it's like this region of Whole Foods talked to another region of Whole Foods and they called us and they're like, we want you in this region. And eventually we went national. And it was one of these things where it was just like, how have we not messed this up? Because it was just two
Yes.
goofballs who didn't know anything about business, kind of holding on to this thing for dear life because it was taking us for a ride.
Totally,
So
and which is
that's
what
it.
I've heard when I've heard similar, like, kind of somewhat crazy stories like that. It is like what you said, 2 goofballs, like, I when you don't know, it's almost can help you because you're just moving instead of knowing how bad it could turn out or how easy it would be to fail, you might stop yourself, which we'll honestly get to when we talk about, how you help people through coaching. But once you're in Whole Foods, did you have, like, a commercial kitchen?
Yeah, so we had a small bakery outside of Boston, and our production was just growing and growing and growing. It was getting tight in there, so we eventually had to get a much bigger bakery in Boston, which I think they're still there now. And yeah, and so we went full commercial kitchen. I don't even know how many employees, lots of equipment, automation, that kind of stuff. And so yeah, they're still out there today. You can find them in any Whole Foods.
And
And
what's the name of the brand?
Stone and Skillet English
Stone
muffins.
and Skillet. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Okay, so cool. So then what happens after Stone and Skillet? Like, where are you still interested in pursuing greater paths in the food space? Or are you like, I'm so sick of that? Like, how do you decide where to head next?
Yeah, it was one of those things where I thought I was going to be doing Stone and Skillet and either for the rest of my life or until we sold the company. But the way that we had capitalized the business, we brought on a lot of investors, and we didn't capitalize, in my opinion, properly. It was like, oh, we need $20,000 for a new piece of equipment. Here's 5% of the company for your $20,000. Like we had no idea what we were doing.
Yeah.
So the investor pool became very big, and it was really filled with a lot of people who didn't really care about food. They just saw something that was going to be successful, and they wanted a good ROI. And eventually, our the way that it was structured in terms of ownership is, instead of like, me and my co-founder at the top with the majority and we were able to call the shots, it just was this like flat, like everybody had the same ownership.
Yeah.
There was a lot of squeaky wheels, and so I lost effectively creative control of my business. And so in 2019, it just was something that I wasn't really interested in being a part of anymore, because it lost its magic. Honestly, it
Mm,
lost its magic, and I wasn't able to direct the trajectory of this business that I started. And
mm,
so I went to my founders and investors, and I said, just buy me out. I'm good. Like I think I'm done with this.
yeah.
They did. And yeah, and so after that, I was kind of financially good to tool around a little bit and figure out what I wanted to do. I didn't have to like immediately go back to work. So I had an idea for a podcast, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try that and see what that's all about. And I hired a coach to help me launch this, and I told him the premise of the podcast, and it was basically about like what's the scientific implications and even the spiritual implications of living with deliberate compassion. It was all about compassion.
Mm,
And he said well, my coach said, well, let me ask you. He said, would you rather be talking into a microphone to 10,000 people and not knowing if you were going to make an impact on their lives, or would you rather speak to one person and know that for sure you were having an impact? And I was like, that I don't know
wait,
what that.
Dan, this is like foreshadowing. Am I about to become a coach?
Hey, you never know. You never know. You never know.
That's like exactly what I said. Like the intent is to help people, and then it's like a hire coach to help me help. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so and also, how'd you get the compassion? Obviously, I know you're a compassionate person, but like, where did that kind of come from? Had you been reading a lot and listening to a lot about compassion?
So I was always kind of interested in kind of spiritual, not religious, but like, manifestation and our, law of attraction and like that whole thing. Like I was kind of always interested in that. Um, and so I was always kind of reading that in the background. And and so I had an experience before I started Stone and Skillet where I just lived with deliberate compassion. Like every day I would just do something, even if it was small, for someone.
Mm,
Um, and after a couple of weeks, I just started to feel better. And I was like, what the heck is that about? It's just like I started to like feel better about myself. I started scanning the world for positivity. It just was really, really helpful. So it always was kind of in the back of my mind that if I leaned into this concept about living with more compassion towards others and the world and all of that, if it helped me, it could probably help other people.
mm.
So it was something like that. And honestly, after Stone and Skillet, I wanted to do something on my own, but only on my own. I didn't want any partners, and I wanted as little infrastructure as possible. So I figured a podcast is probably a good path for that.
I'm honestly just going to try that today. When I get down, focusing a little bit less on myself and more on others and seeing positivity instead of seeing negativity, which you have helped me a lot with, is meaningful. Just a small amount is meaningful to like your entire day. Um, okay, so you're talking to your coach.
And I hired him, and that's when he posed that question of, would you
Uh,
rather talk to a microphone or one person? So I said one person for sure. I'd like to do that, but what is that? And he said, well, that's coaching. I said, okay, what's coaching? And he's like, well, I also help coaches like become coaches because I'm a coach myself. And I said, okay, so let's pivot. So Yeah, he turned me on to like Tony Robbins stuff. He gave me like this like coach training thing that, I listened to a bunch, and it was really helpful. Like it opened my eyes and it helped me see like, aspects of the human psychology that I'd never really considered. But
Mm-hmm.
at some point I just thought, there's just no way human beings are this complicated. Like the way that Tony was describing them. And look,
Mm,
Tony Robbins, I respect everything he's built and all that stuff's helped a lot of people. But for me, I just had this kind of this instinct of there's no way human beings are this complicated. And so I started searching for other coaches who might be able to help me. And I came across this book called The Inside Out Revolution from Michael Neal, who's a world renowned coach. And I read that book and my whole world flipped inside out.
mm,
Like what he was talking about was so profound in its implications and it had such an effect on me that I was like, I need to learn what this is. I have to learn this. So I reached out to his people and I asked if he does any apprenticeships and mentorships, and he did. And they had one spot left, and I snagged that up. And
mm,
and yeah, I started working with Michael and working with some other coaches, and I kind of took the approach of, instead of getting certified or going through culinary school, I was just going to work for really awesome chefs and I would learn through them. So I
mm-hmm.
took that approach with coaches.
Yep.
So I didn't get, certified as a coach or anything. I just worked with incredible coaches.
Super
And
cool.
yeah, and that's kind of it. Like I've been doing it since 2019 and haven't looked back.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask, like, how do you become a coach? Do you have to get a certification? It sounds like perhaps not. You can do it the way you did, learn by getting coached. It sounds like the answer is no.
I mean, it's not the only. I've never been asked by one client or prospective client what my certifications are.
Yeah, it's
Um,
sort of like, why? What's the point of
yeah,
needing to be certified?
from what I've seen, honestly, it's like the only area where that may matter, but not always, is in corporate. So if you get hired by like an actual, corporation to coach people, they'll,
Mm,
HR just wants to check off a box that you're certified.
yes. Yeah.
That's
That's,
I think where it would only, but right now I'm coaching a corporation within a corporation, and they didn't ask me at all. So it's,
yeah.
yeah.
If there's someone that, it sounds like you were maybe in like your mid 30s or so when you were embarking on the coaching journey. Do you think it's helpful for coaches or people that might be listening that may want to pursue a path in coaching to have working experience before becoming a coach, or do you feel like it's something, or life experience, or do you feel like it's something you can pursue at any age?
Life experience really helps, right? Not to say that you have to go through some crazy stuff in your life to be a good coach. It, it, having been through some things, right? Whether it's being fired or, getting married and getting a divorce or starting a business or whatever, some kind of life experience, that to me can very often be more helpful in a coaching container than knowing exactly the right coaching questions to ask and how to be a coach and all of that stuff, because you're
Hmm.
speaking from experience,
Yep.
right? And you really empathize with the person who's on the other end of the conversation, and that in and of itself creates transformation. That in
Yep.
and of itself can elicit insight within the other person just by knowing, like, well, yeah, they've been here too. Like they've
Hmm.
experienced what I've experienced, right? So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think life experience is definitely helpful.
Totally. My next question is gonna be like, what do people come to you with? There's many different types of people you're working with. Why do you find search like, I need a coach, help?
Yeah. Well, hmm. I might give a coachy question or answer here, but I'm a coach, so it's going to come out that way. Um, I don't think people need coaching. I think they want coaching, right? I think that people and inherently, like, if you're comparing it to, therapy or consulting, therapy not exclusively but usually kind of looks in the past and says, what happened back there that has you feeling or thinking this way or behaving this way, and let's
Okay.
work on that. Again, not exclusively, but very often that's where it focuses. Consulting is kind of like, where are you now? Where would you like to be? And here are some strategies that I know of that can help you get there.
Hmm.
Right. Coaching is like, what do you want?
Yeah.
What do you want and what's getting in the way? Let's go through a conversation that helps you see for yourself uh, what would be most helpful from you to get from here to there.
It's what's getting in the way is really what I'm realizing is just honestly, like the coaching experience, and while we've talked about it through the lens of this podcast, what I've noticed is it's a mindset shift for my entire life. Like I now catch myself in life in all moments being like, you're getting in your own way, like why not, like, or just do it. It's really transformed the way that I actually move throughout my life. Then next question I wanted to ask is like, what is a common breakthrough or frequent moment in your coaching sessions where people realize, oh, like it's you help them realize something isn't as hard as they're making it?
Mm. Well, the conversation that I find to be the most illuminating in that respect is the conversation around understanding where your experience is actually coming from.
Mm,
Right. So we experience our thinking. Like that's part of the human design. Like
yep.
that's built into the system is that we have a thought and we experience it as visceral, as reality, right? And that is really helpful to know when we're caught up in something, in a circumstance that we think is causing our experience, right? So when people say like, oh, I have to move this weekend. Oh,
Mm,
moving is so stressful. Moving is always stressful, right? It's like we attribute an experience to a circumstance. But you can put two people in the same circumstance and they'll have completely different experiences based off of whatever thinking or meaning they attribute to that
yep.
circumstance. So we conflate those two. We think they're one and the same. We think that circumstance is causing us to feel or experience something. What actually it's like it's more of an inside out kind of deal where
Yep.
we'll look at a circumstance, a neutral circumstance, and we'll attribute some thinking to it or a meaning to it. And that's how we'll experience it.
Hmm.
So, well, what are the implications of that? Well, um, as soon as we recognize that our experience of frustration or anger or anxiety or fear or sadness is coming from some just temporary unhelpful thinking in the moment, we don't have to be scared about our situations. We don't have to do anything about anything really,
Mm,
because as soon as that thought passes, we're good as new. We're back to normal. We're not having that experience
hmm.
anymore, right? So this, and it's a much deeper conversation than probably we have time to go into
Right.
because it's a very rabbit hole conversation.
Yeah.
But
I love a
that
rabbit hole though, but
yeah,
you
yeah,
don't have
yeah.
to keep.
Maybe we do part two or something like that. But helping people see where their experience is actually coming from, I have found to be the most transformational conversation I can have with any of my clients.
Totally.
Because once they see that for real and they really get that, they we know what to do when our thinking settles, right? When this starts to get less noisy, something comes up that we know what the next move is. We know whether or not to do anything about that. We know what we want to say to that person or whatever it is. Our wisdom comes up
Hmm.
when this settles. So to answer the question very succinctly, even though I've spent 3 minutes already talking about what it is, it's just helping people settle more in their mind and getting a deeper understanding of their own experience.
Hmm.
That creates true, lasting transformation to where it
Yes.
permeates every aspect of your life.
It's so true. I've experienced it, and a couple things came to mind as you were sharing that. You said it more eloquently, but like mindset shifts. The other day I mentioned, oh, I only get this many listeners on my podcast on average, and I'm like, how am I going to go? Like this is like so it's so low, whatever. And you were like, some people could say, oh my god, this many people listen to my podcast, and I appreciate, or you could be neutral about it and be like, yeah, this many people listen to my podcast, or you can be like, this is awful. This many people listen to my podcast. And I really appreciate that. It's, it's really helpful to have a coach to say something like that, because I know that wasn't just your point. Your point was to help me kind of shift my mindset, but to even have, and I'm just kind of uh promoting a coach, having a coach, because it's like when you have a therapist who you share something that you might feel like shameful about, and they just respond so neutrally, and they're not like, wait, Bryn, you did that, like that's so bad, or they're just like, oh, okay, um tell me more. That's sort of the response you gave, versus being like, oh god, Bryn, like I don't know how you're going to grow this podcast if that's where you're at. I didn't know that. So one, that's something I love. And also two, just this morning, I was looking at how many people listened to my most recently released episode, which was like 2 days ago with my sisters. And I was like, whoa. And it was the same number. I was like, this many people already listened to it. Like, that's kind of cool, because I know the amount of people that have texted me about it, that are the typical group of weekly listeners. And it was a larger number than that amount of people. And I was like, that's really cool. There's people out there that are listening that I don't know who they, exactly who it is. So just in that moment, I've already been able, in that, 3 days since we met on this week, I've been able to shift that a little bit. I also wanted to ask, this is your business. This is how I presume you're making income. If someone's interested in coaching, like being able to work from home, flexibility is in this career. Like, is that something that's important to you? And is that typical for coaches?
Yeah. Yes, it's important to me. Is it typical for coaches? It depends on how aggressive you think you need to be to grow your business. I realized very early on that I needed space in between sessions to settle my mind and
Mm-hmm.
to calm my nervous system, so that
Mm-hmm.
when I showed up to a conversation, I was settled. I was good. Because
Yeah.
I used to have back to back to back to back with no, like, hardly any space in between, and it was awful. At the end of the day, I was just running on fumes.
Mm.
So, and I know coaches do that because they think that's what's required
Yep.
to grow a thriving, prosperous business. Um, Not for me. So,
Yeah.
like, I mean, the way that I've structured my business is I have 3 calls a day,
Mm.
1 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and there's usually an hour in between. And then I take my Fridays off. So I have 15 calls a week. No, it's not. It's I
12.
don't know. Yeah, I haven't had as much coffee as I need to. Yeah. Right. So it's what
Maybe.
12 calls,
Yeah.
12 calls a week. And I take my Fridays off to just let myself be. I
Yeah.
call them my blue sky days, where anything's possible. So I just let myself sit quietly and then think, what am I inspired to do? And it might not
Mm-hmm.
have anything to do with building a business. But oftentimes when we're building something in the world, especially a business, and we give ourselves space and permission to go do something that we're inspired to do, even though it seemingly doesn't align with the thing that we're building, very
Mm.
often that is when something happens in the thing that we're building. Either you come back and you get an email, or you get an idea when you're off doing something that you're inspired to do about the business that you otherwise wouldn't have. And
Mm.
so I really give myself a lot of space throughout the week to just live my life, just be a
Mm.
human.
Yeah.
And that works for me. Maybe not
Yeah.
for everybody. That's what works for me. Yeah.
And also, to like those 12 calls that you have a week, or sessions, like those are with 12 different individuals. Maybe some of your clients are meeting twice a week, but for the most part, I'm guessing like it's generally 12 unique experiences, and you have to completely, calibrate. And then speaking of growing your business, I was going to ask, like, generally, how do coaches, or how do you grow a business? Is it word of mouth? Is it referrals?
Yeah. Yes, it is kind of word of mouth and renewals. Oftentimes my clients continue to coach with me.
Mm.
And as far as like more of like, I guess, outbound approach, like biz dev, if you could call it that, it's just me being present to other people and noticing, oh, I could help them with that. And then I invite them into a conversation,
Mm.
and that's it. So it's not really like a trick or a tactic. It's more of a way of being, right? Consciously being out there in the world as a professional coach, and
Yeah.
listening to people in ways where they say something and you go, you know, you're kind of like, oh, well, I could help them with that. Not that I want them to be a client. That's not the point. It's just I'm of service to people. So if I notice something that I can help them, I offer them a call, and it's no pressure, no obligation, no strings attached. I'm not trying to get you as a client. But
Yeah.
if I'm doing that all the time, if I'm out in the world just listening to people and honestly loving people because I'm listening with a loving attention,
Yeah.
um, then I'm going to hear something very often and I invite them into a conversation. Some of those people become clients, some of them don't. It doesn't really matter to me which ones do or
Yeah.
don't. Um, and that's as close to biz dev, I guess, as you would call it. And I also, you know, if I'm on LinkedIn or something like that, and I connect with like a CEO or a founder that I'm interested in, you know, learning more about, I'll send them a quick message and be like, hey, you know, love what you're up to. I'd love to learn more about what you're doing. Are you up for a conversation? With no pretense of coaching whatsoever.
Yeah.
But in that conversation, they might say something that I go, oh, that's interesting. And then
Yeah.
I'll invite to a conversation more of
Cool.
the coaching
And
nature.
as you started, people with coaches want a coach versus maybe I said need and you were like generally they want. And that is, I think, the key piece is someone is maybe less likely to even engage. Say they have the initial phone call and they're like, this isn't like that's not the time for them. They need to be ready and willing and want. Of course, you know, you're not trying to force anyone to get a coach.
And I've shared this quote with you before, but I'm just going to share it here in case
Please.
nobody's heard it before. One of my favorite quotes, and it's from this guy named Howard Thurman, who he he studied under Gandhi, and he was Martin Luther King's mentor. So it's like you know this guy was he knew some stuff, right? He
Hmm.
really was plugged into all of that. But the quote is, uh, you know, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do that. Because what the world needs are people who have come alive. And to me, it's like, yeah, that's it.
It's totally
You
it.
know,
And it is really what I feel like is something I'm very interested in doing through this podcast, honestly, is um if you don't feel alive right now in your job, you feel like it's just not aligned and something's off, like one, don't panic. You're not alone. You can get there. And as you said, age is just a number. It's okay if you're 21, it's okay if you're 61, or beyond. And like let's find a career path that works really well for you because I agree the world needs more awake alive people. I think it is a great note to end on. So Dan, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. This has been really fun. I'm very thankful for all that you've helped me with so far, and I would love for you to share where the listeners can find you if they're interested in speaking with you, having an intro call.
you can find me on LinkedIn, just Dan Crothers, and you can go on my website, dancrothers.com, and you'll get my email. And yeah, I just want to acknowledge you for the work that you're doing and really diving into this thing that helps you come alive and makes you come alive because, you know, not to sound too cheesy, but it is what the world needs.
Yeah,
And it's exciting to see you, you know, doing this because I think what your message is important
thank you so
and
much.
really help a lot of people. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. And thank you so much. We'll talk in a few weeks.
Yes. Thanks, Brandon.
Bye.